Johnny Whitaker, as a child actor, appeared in the series Family Affair in the 1960s and then went on to star in half a dozen Disney films throughout the 1970s. But what many people don't know is that he has ties to Eastern Idaho. And we're pleased to be talking with him today over Zoom. Johnny, good to talk to
Hello.
you.
How's Eastern Idaho?
It's great. It's starting to warm up finally. We've had a long winter.
Very good. Yes, I just returned from a 2-week trip to Spain and Portugal. I'm doing a documentary on the drug policy of Portugal. So since the pandemic kind of put a wrench in things, I had to go back and reacquaint myself with some of the people there but I also served an LDS mission to Portugal 40 years ago,
Oh, wow.
and so I have still some good friends and people there.
Yeah. Okay. Well, yeah. So let's talk
I've got
about.
a t-shirt, Lisbon, Portugal.
Oh, there it is. Yep. So let's talk about your ties to Eastern Idaho. So your parents, from what I understand, grew up in Clifton, which is near Preston.
Right, yeah, I guess it was Preston High my mom went to.
Oh, okay.
But not my parents, but my mother and my grandparents had a farm in there in not Preston, but would you say
Clifton?
Clifton? There you go. uh, yeah, and mom went to the high school there, Preston or Clifton High. I don't know which one at the time. It was in the late 40s because she graduated, and then in 1950 she and my father met at at in Logan at Utah State University, and they met and married. And then Dad got a job in Southern California, and 1950, I guess they got married in 1951. First child in 1951. No, let's see. They got married in December, and the first child was September. And then my brother, soon after that, in 53, and then they left for Southern California. And the rest of the clan of 8 children were born in Southern California. I was number 5 of 8. The end of the older kids and the eldest of the younger kids.
So your dad, you guys moved to, you said Southern California. What did your dad do for work?
My father got a job at Pacoima Junior High School, which was being built in 1953, and he was an industrial arts teacher. He taught woodworking, leatherworking, and when you went to his class, you had to learn how to cut wood and put wood together and make purses and things that unfortunately our young people today don't have those opportunities to learn those skills today.
Yeah.
They're trying to teach them CRT and other things that have nothing to do with education, and take away some of the great things that an industrial arts could teach them. I mean, there's people today that let me know through Facebook that my father was the reason that they started the business that they have, and that the skills that they learned in woodworking and leatherworking were things that they will never forget, and that provided a an opportunity to work with their hands and just get tons of, not tons, but many people finding me, finding my brothers and sisters on Facebook and other places just to say thank you, and that's pretty cool.
That is cool. That's great. I did want to mention you grew up as a member of the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints. And the reason I mentioned that is because that played a role in your start in acting, if I remember right. Is that right?
Oh, absolutely. Yes. And
Do you want to talk about how you got started in acting?
sure. I was actually the congregation that my mother and father and we were a part of was also the same LDS congregation that the Osmonds were in.
Oh, really?
And yes. And so my father and mother knew the Osmond parents. And anyway, my mother was the junior choir, or the going to, what do we call it? The kids, anyway.
Primary?
Uh, Primary, that's what we do. That's what we call it. She was the primary chorister.
Was
And
Donnie? Was Donnie in your primary class?
well, he actually, Marie was more my age. Donnie was about a year or two older. But I do remember, well, I'll give that story because the timeline. Anyway, my mother was preparing for the October children's program, and a song that's very dear to most LDS people is called I Am a Child of God, had just come out that year. It was 1963, and my mother didn't have time to teach it to all of the kids, so she taught it to one young girl who would sing the verses, and my sisters in three-part harmony would sing the chorus. Well, that little girl got sick, and the only other child that knew the words basically was me, because I practiced with my sisters. So even though my name wasn't in the program, myself and my sisters, I started, I am a child of God, and he has sent me here, and then has given me an earthly home with parents kind and dear. Then my sisters and I would sing, lead me, guide me, walk beside me, help me find the way, teach me all that I must do. Because it was now, yeah, it was I must know, and now it's due, to live with him someday. Anyway, then I started singing the second verse. I am a child of God, and I started to forget the words to the second verse. So I just started making them up, because there was all these people out there looking at me, and I didn't want to mess up, and my sisters were elbowing me saying that's not right, and just cool it, just let me go. And I finished a verse of the second one, and my sister sang, and the congregation was laughing and crying because it was, kind of funny to watch. And then we got through the third verse because my sister helped me with the third verse. And then at the end of the sacrament meeting, which was what it was, the congregational meeting, my mother was stopped by a member of the congregation, not one of the Osmonds, but a member of the congregation whose son had done a couple commercials, and said, you know, a 3-year-old or 3.5-year-old being not scared and not crying and just kind of keeping the show must go on mentality has some chutzpah. And so, she gave my mother her son's agent. We went to meet, and she sent me on an audition that day, and I got the job. It was an OK used car commercial.
Oh, wow.
Um, and Chevrolet OK used cars. And from then on, I did quite a few other commercials that were in black and white, some in color. And then I did some other little things. And I was the original Scotty Baldwin. And then I was in The Russians Are Coming, where I met Brian Keith. And Brian Keith suggested that I get a role in his new upcoming series titled Family Affair, or The Brian Keith Show. And it was originally going to be cast a 16-year-old girl, a 10-year-old boy, and a 6-year-old girl. And Brian insisted that I come to the audition. And so I was there, the only 6-year-old boy with all these 10-year-old boys. But when they put myself and Anissa Jones together, they said, cut, we're going to change it to 6-year-old twins. And that's how Buffy and Jody began.
So Brian Keith actually is the one who reached out to you and said, I think you'd be great for this show.
Yeah, well, my agent had suggested, my agent and Brian both, and my agent was Mary Grady, who just passed away at 95 years old, and was kind of like a godmother to me. And, but she insisted that I continue to work even on hiatus, which is when you have about 3 months of not working. And so I did a lot of guest starring roles in Bonanza, Lancer, The Virginian, Gunsmoke. I did 3 episodes of Gunsmoke, and Green Acres, and Bewitched, and tons of stuff that was just tons of fun to do. And got to do 4 Walt Disney movies back to back in 1971. And when I was set for a 5th film, Tom Sawyer had come out, as they were looking for Tom Sawyer. They'd gone all over the country seeing 3,000 different young boys for the role. And my agent said,
hey,
you
Johnny,
can go all.
Sorry, I just wanted to ask you, I wanted to backtrack a little bit, go back to Family Affair.
Oh, sure.
First of all, to mention for people who are watching this may not be familiar with who Brian Keith is. Brian Keith was the star of Family Affair, went on to star in like The Parent Trap, the original Parent Trap that Disney made. But anyway, with Family Affair, when you got that job, you were 7?
I was just 6.5.
So as a 6.5-year-old boy, you basically, you and your co-star, your young co-star, you're carrying this show. I mean, you guys are the main characters.
We're the ones that everybody wanted to wake, or, get up. And the show started at 9 p.m. on Thursdays. And then because we became so popular, and at 9 o'clock, it was when most of the kids went to bed, they decided to move us up to 7:30 on Monday nights. And then we became one of the highest rated shows of the time, always in the top of what they call the Nielsen ratings, which is kind of outdated today, but at the time, it was how they would rate. And we were always in the top 10, even in our last year.
Yeah. So as this 6.5-year-old boy, I mean, you got to memorize pages and pages of dialogue. I mean, when you look back on that experience, what goes through your mind?
Well, I was able to read fairly well at 6, and I would get in the car at well, we would wake up about 6, have family prayer. Mom would fix breakfast and lunch for the kids. Dad would take some of the kids to school, and then on our way to my work, we'd take the other kids to school. And I woke up about, like I said, 6, got in the car by 7, and got to work at 8, got into wardrobe and then into my schoolroom, waiting for them to call us for the first shot. That was usually ready about 8:45, but we had to have a minimum of 20 minutes of school without being interrupted, or else it didn't count. And so then we would go on the set, do our scenes, go back to school, go back to the set, go back to school, go to lunch, go back to school, go back to the set. And basically, I would read my lines on the way home, and then come home, do some chores, minimal chores, because I was already having an 8-hour day of work. Well, a 5-hour day with 3 hours of school. And then we would get ready for bed. And, I would read my lines over with my mom before I went to bed. And then my mom would clean the house and mop the floors. And then about 10 o'clock, 11 o'clock, when I was asleep, she'd read me my lines while I was in my sleep. And then the next morning, I would read on the way to work my lines, and my mother would, try to remember while she was driving what the other lines were.
Yeah.
And, it worked. I wish I had that same memory today at 63.
Yeah. So, I mean, you were living, I mean, you were living like an adult at 6.5 years old.
Yeah. Most of my companions were older than I. And I mean, Anissa Jones, who was Buffy, was just almost 2 years older than I. And so I was the youngest on the set, but they were very good. And Brian made sure that there was no cussing on the set. If they cussed, they had to pay a quarter, and then we got the money.
Oh,
And but they were really respectful, and I had a very positive childhood. Um, Teenage wasn't as positive, but childhood was pretty good. And I, family affair, I'm very proud of the work that I did. And, I look at it today. You can watch it on Hulu, on just about any streaming service.
yeah.
And I'm not getting paid for it, though. That's a little, uh, I'm talking to my SAG representative to find out why. But, even after 50 plus years, it still holds up. And I get fan mail and people. I just got a cameo that I do for someone, and they just said that their mother wakes up every morning at 6 a.m. to make sure that she gets to watch Buffy and Jody. So,
Wow. That's cool. So, you mentioned, first of all, I don't want to get too far ahead of ourselves. Where did you had some kind of interaction with Marie Osmond somewhere in
oh,
this timeline?
Yeah, well, what happened is after we did Family Affair, so I'm now about 6 and a half. Um, my parents, on a semi-regular basis after church on Sunday night, because at the time we had 3 different meetings. We would go in the morning for, well, I didn't at the time, but they would have priesthood and relief society. Then you'd come home, and then you'd go back for Sunday school, and then you'd come back, and then you'd go back to church for sacrament meeting, which was usually 3 or 4 p.m. and it lasted till 5:30. And so then we would come home, and after you come home, have dinner. All of us 8 went over to the Osmonds 9, and mom and dad and George and Olive would go into the kitchen while the kids would go and watch the Twilight Zone. And I just remember that for some reason we weren't in the same primary class, but I see this beautiful young girl come walking down the stairs dressed in her Sunday dress and looking very pretty and saying hello. And I went, oh, I'm in love.
Wow.
And we went down and watched the Twilight Zone with the other kids. And I just remember being infatuated by her. And then met up with Donnie and the brothers when they were preparing to build their studio in Orem, and I was going to BYU at the time.
Oh, okay. So as an adult, have you ran into Donnie or Marie or any of the Osmonds?
All the time, yeah. I just gone over to Portugal, but before that, I saw Marie in Seattle at one of her concerts and went backstage. Well, she had a mic check, and during the mic check, we went backstage and talked with her, and um, it was very, very nice.
Great.
And I'd seen them in a few times when they were in Las Vegas, and went back to see them afterwards. So,
Oh,
uh,
okay. Wow. So I want to go back because you were talking about Family Affair that runs for 5 or 6 seasons, and then you get into your teenage years, and you said childhood was a pretty good childhood, but then you got to be a teenager, and that wasn't so good. So
well,
what do you mean by that?
well, when I was 11, I did 4 Walt Disney movies. Then I did Tom Sawyer, and it kind of backfired on my parents because they insisted that, well, I wanted to go to Boy Scout camp, but you had to pay $200 or $300. But they wouldn't pay with my money that I was making. I had to go and do what the other boys were doing, which was go door to door knocking and selling greeting cards. So I went door to door, and of course, Johnny Whitaker, Jody shows up at your door, and they'll buy it right from you. So I made the money very quickly, and you know, turned it over to my scout leader, and was preparing to go to a week at the Boy Scout camp. Well, the same week the Boy Scout camp was the week that Tom Sawyer started filming. So I went to the audition, and they said, great, we want you. And I said, but I'm not going to do it because I've already paid for my Boy Scout. So they let me miss one day of work. And then my uncle drove up in his limousine and picked me up and then drove us back. So I was embarrassed that, it was, anyway, got into the limousine and went to the airport and flew to Columbia, Missouri, where we did the movie. Well, outside of Columbia in a little town called Arrow Rock. But for the next 2 months, in the hot, sweltering heat of June and July, we did the movie, and it was lots of fun. And
Wow.
this is the 50th anniversary of the release of Tom Sawyer, 1973 to 2023.
That's right. That's right. Wow. Okay.
And
Um,
I gave Jody Foster her first on-screen kiss.
that's right. That's right. You did. Yeah.
And then she turns gay. Not my fault.
I do have to ask you because in our family, Gunsmoke is a favorite. I grew up on Gunsmoke. James Arness was always my hero. What was it like? Do you have any memories of working with James Arness?
Oh, sure. I like I said, I did 3 episodes. I did one where I was an orphaned kid. And then the other one, I became an orphan as well. I was always the orphan waif. And it was a 2-parter where nothing happened in Dodge City. It was all outside.
Right.
And my mother was a call girl, but she and a group of other girls were
I lost the sound. Sorry, say that again.
they were hiding gold um, in their wagon, and so some bad guys were following them. And James Arness had picked me up from my grandfather, who was shot for some water, and trying to take me to Dodge, I guess, and turn me into the orphanage. But we found this group of women who were being, you know, followed by some bad men, and there was a shootout, and they threw all the gold out, and then the gold got blown up and shot up and went back to the wind. And my mother was there, and she recognized me, but I didn't really recognize her. And we got back together. So it was a nice one. It was called, what was that called? Waste. It was Waste 1 and Waste 2.
This was late in the show's run. This was like season 18 or something.
Yeah, season 17.
Yeah, yeah, that's right. But was he so you worked very closely with him. Was he I've been told that James Arness on screen, he played this character that was kind of stoic, but in real life he was quite the jokester. Is that
Oh,
true?
yeah. He was really kind, tall, stoic, um, larger than life, as he really was. But he liked to throw me on his shoulders and play horse. And, I got to ride horses. And in Kanab, Utah, is where we filmed Waste, about 90% of it. And I go back to Kanab every year in the last part of August for their Kanab days and movie days, which is kind of fun.
Oh, that's fun. Zoom is telling me I have about 10 minutes. So I want to get to I want to talk about your drug addiction a little bit. When were you introduced to drugs and when did that addiction start?
Well, I was a good Mormon boy. Um, Went on a mission to Portugal, came back, got married. My wife divorced me after 3 years so she could marry the man who gave me my bachelor party. And that was strike number 1. Strike number 2, I was dealing with my divorce, and I met a young lady who had a 4-year-old daughter who I kind of fell in love with, the 4-year-old daughter, in a fatherly type of a way, may I clear that up.
Well, yeah, yeah, sure.
And met with her mother, who was just as pretty as the young lady, as the young girl, and thought, wow, I can have a family. But unfortunately, the mother um, was mentally very distraught, and she was found dead. And that was strike number two for me. And then the day after I found out about her passing, I got a letter stating my divorce was 100% final and done. And that was kind of strike number three. I said, God doesn't exist. I'm leaving all of the beliefs that I had, because God wouldn't do this to me if he were God. And I went to the dark side, Luke Skywalker,
Yeah.
and played around, had a good time. Um, was excommunicated from the LDS Church, um, which was very important and very good for me, even though some people would say, that it's not fair or not right. But it made it so that I didn't have to be responsible for anything that I really did as a member of the church, because I was no longer a member of the church. But I got involved in drugs and alcohol, sex, drugs, rock and roll. And in 1998, my family had an intervention, and I got clean and sober because of that intervention. And 25 years later, which is today, um, well, 20 years ago, I started a nonprofit called Paso por Paso, which means step by step, because I speak 5 languages, but English, Portuguese, Spanish, French, and American Sign Language. And I found that there was not real treatment for those who were monolingual Hispanics in Los Angeles. So I started my organization to specifically help them. And we also do positive things for people in recovery.
So
And
so years ago in 98, when your family intervened, what did that entail? What was that about?
well, they said, you got to get clean and sober, or you're never going to see your 2, 3, and 4-year-old nephews again. And I was Uncle Donut and would always take them out to get donuts, and let them have 2 donuts. And so I was like, dang, if, Uncle Johnny's going to give us 2 donuts, we want to go with him. And they said, never again, because of my drugs and alcohol, can the kids be in my car, or can I have any interaction with them? And that kind of softened my heart. It wasn't until about 12 days after the intervention that I actually have my sobriety date, which is September 25th, 1998. No, 1997. Sorry, I got to get the days right.
Yeah,
But
yeah.
5 years after that, I became a certified counselor, and I've been doing that now for 20 years, and love the work that I do. But I'm also still in show business, and I continue to work as a drug and alcohol counselor, and just wrote a script, a short film that I'm hoping to do in September in North Carolina. And then next year, in about this time, my documentary, get that finished and done. And I'm also writing my memoirs. So
Wow.
everything that I'm talking about, you can read all the nitty gritty in my book that should be coming out about the same time this year, next year.
Oh, so a year from now.
From now, yeah.
Um, what about your faith? Have you since rejoined the LDS Church?
Well, in 2017, my sponsor, 12-step sponsor, who I didn't know when I asked him to be my sponsor, was a member of the High Council of the church and the Spanish group, and said that if I wanted him to be my sponsor, I had to at least go back to church and go back to reading the Book of Mormon. And I did. And then I realized that even though I didn't like it, I could be celibate. And so in 2019, I was rebaptized. And in 2021, I received all of my blessings. And when I went to Portugal and to Madrid, I was able to go to the Madrid LDS temple and the Portuguese LDS temple, which was a goal of mine. And, now chalk that one out.
Yeah. Wow. Well, good for you. So, a drug addiction that lasted how many years?
About 10 years.
10 years. And you've been sober now for 25.
Yeah.
That's
So
great.
double and a half.
Yeah. Well, great. Well, good for you. Well, I'm excited about this documentary and this memoir. I've got less than a minute. Anything else you want to add in the last few seconds here?
Well, you can always go to johnnywhitaker.com. Join my Facebook page. I'm not exactly sure what it is, but if you go to johnnywhitaker.com and About Us, there's some links there. And maybe you can put them in the bottom here. And every September, I celebrate the lives of those lost and the lives of those recovered. So if you have anybody who's died of a drug overdose, make sure to hit me up and we'll make sure that we remember them in September.